The ridge had always been a place of watchfulness, not danger. From its narrow spine, the Apache girl could see miles of desert stretching into the evening. Haze, sagebrush, scattered rock, and the fading gold of the sun sinking toward the horizon. She had climbed there to gather her thoughts after Harsh. Words were exchanged in the camp below. The wind tugged at her loose braids, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and distant rain. For a moment, the land felt calm, as if it were holding its breath. Then anger followed her up the ridge. Footsteps scraped against stone behind her. Voices rose, sharp, accusing, and before she could turn fully, a sudden force slammed into her shoulder. The shove wasn't meant to kill, only to humiliate, but the ridge was narrow and unforgiving. Her foot slid on loose gravel. Time seemed to slow as the ground vanished beneath her, replaced by empty air and a rush of terror that clenched her chest. She fell hard, striking the slope below and rolling helplessly. Her body bounced against jagged rocks, each impact knocking the breath from her lungs. The world spun in flashes of sky and stone, blue and brown blurring together. When she finally came to a stop, pain roared through her like fire racing through dry grass. Her leg lay twisted beneath her, wrong in a way she instantly understood. A sharp crack echoed in her ears, bone snapping under. "Wait!" and she screamed before she could stop herself. The sound tore out of her throat and vanished into the open land. She tried to sit up, then to stand, but agony surged and her strength failed her. She collapsed back onto the ground, clutching her leg with trembling hands. Tears welled despite her effort to stay silent. Among her people, endurance was strength, but pain like this was impossible to hide. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the rocks like long fingers. Each breath came shallow and fast. Fear crept in, not just of the injury, but of what would come next. Predators roamed these hills, and night would bring cold. She was alone, broken, and far from help. She pressed her face against the dirt, biting her lip to keep from crying out again. Still a soft sob escaped, carried by the wind down the ridge, a fragile sound of pain and survival drifting into the vast, uncaring desert. The cowboy had been riding the high ground since late afternoon, scanning the land for a steer that had wandered off from the herd. The ridge was rough, the kind of place animals favored when they wanted to disappear, and he moved carefully, letting his horse pick its way over loose stone. The sun was low now, staining the desert in copper and shadow, when a sound reached him that didn't belong to the wind or the wildlife. It was crying, faint, uneven, carried on the breeze. He reined in at once. Out here, a human voice meant trouble. His hand hovered near his rifle as he listened again, turning his head to catch the direction. The sound came from below the ridge, somewhere among the rocks and scrub. He urged the horse forward, then dismounted and continued on foot, boots crunching softly against gravel. When he saw her, he stopped short. She lay at the base of the slope, half curled in the dust, dark hair tangled and face streaked with dirt and tears. One glance at her leg told him what had happened. It was bent at an unnatural angle, swelling already, the kind of injury that could kill a person if left alone. He knew who she was by her dress and bearing, an Apache girl. And he knew just as surely that his presence could terrify her. Slowly, deliberately, he raised both hands to show they were empty. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I heard you. I'm not here to hurt you." Her eyes snapped to him, wide with fear and pain. For a heartbeat, he thought she might try to crawl away, but the injury held her fast. She cried out again, clutching her leg, the sound cutting through him sharper than any threat. Whatever history stood between them felt small, compared to the fact that she was bleeding, broken, and alone. He knelt a few paces away, careful not to crowd her. Up close, he could see her shaking, see the grit on her skin, and the way she struggled to breathe through the pain. He tore a strip from his shirt and held it up. "I'm going to help," he said, "if you'll let me." After a long moment, she gave a small, exhausted nod. He moved closer, examining the injury with practiced eyes, swallowing hard at the severity of it. He bound the leg as best he could to keep it still, his hands firm but gentle. Each time she winced, he paused, waiting until she was ready again. The desert grew quiet around them, as if watching. As he finished, he looked at her and made a decision that would change both their paths. Leaving her wasn't an option. "We'll get through the night," he said quietly. "I promise." Night settled quickly in the desert, the warmth of day draining away as shadows deepened and the first stars appeared. The cowboy knew they couldn't move far, not with her leg in the state it was, so he chose a sheltered hollow between boulders where the wind would pass overhead. He gathered dry brush and struck a careful flame, keeping it small. Fire could be comfort, but it could also be a signal. She watched every movement, eyes sharp despite the pain. When he returned with water, he knelt and offered it without touching her. She drank in shallow sips, hands trembling. The relief softened her face. And for the first time since he'd arrived, her breathing slowed. He studied the injury again by firelight. The swelling had worsened, and he knew the bone needed to be set as best as possible. He explained what he had to do, choosing simple words and steady tone. Fear flickered across her face, but she nodded. She braced herself against the rock as he worked, biting down on a strip of cloth. When the bone shifted back into place, her cry tore into the night, then faded into ragged breaths. He splinted the leg with straight branches and bound it with leather and cloth, checking the circulation with care. When it was done, he leaned back exhausted. He fed the fire and kept watch while she drifted in and out of sleep, waking when pain surged. Each time he was there offering water, adjusting the bindings, murmuring reassurance. Wolves howled somewhere beyond the hills. The horse snorted softly, uneasy. The cowboy kept the fire alive and his rifle close. But his eyes returned again and again to her, making sure she was breathing evenly. Hours passed. In the quiet, words came more easily. She told him her name and where her people camped in the valley. He told her his and how he'd learned to set bones on the trail out of necessity. They didn't speak of old wrongs, but both felt their weight. Trust grew not from speeches, but from the way he never rushed her, never turned away when she cried, never slept while she needed him awake. Just before dawn, the cold sharpened. He draped his coat over her shoulders and stoked the fire once more. She looked at him then, not with fear, but with something steadier. Gratitude, perhaps, or the fragile certainty that, for this night at least, she was not alone. Dawn broke pale and quiet, the desert washed in soft grey light. The fire had burned low, leaving only warm embers, and the air carried a chill that crept into bones. The cowboy rose carefully, stretching stiff muscles, and checked the girl's leg once more. The splint had held through the night. Swelling remained, but her color was better, her breathing steady. When she opened her eyes, she met his gaze without fear. He helped her sit up slowly, offering water and a small piece of dried meat. She ate sparingly, conserving strength. Moving her would be risky, but staying was worse. He brought the horse closer, speaking gently, letting her rest her hand against the animal's neck to feel its calm. Together, they planned each careful step. With deliberate care, he fashioned a makeshift sling and brace, then lifted her, slow, steady, onto the saddle. She clenched her jaw, pain flaring, but she didn't cry out. He admired that strength, born of endurance rather than pride. He mounted behind her, holding the reins loosely and guiding the horse along the safest path down the ridge, avoiding loose stone and steep turns. As the sun climbed, the valley opened before them. Smoke rose in thin lines, her people's camp. He slowed at the edge of the open ground and stopped. History weighed heavy here. He did not cross the invisible line uninvited. Instead, he slid from the saddle and helped her down to a rock, keeping his movements respectful and calm. She raised her voice then, calling out. Figures emerged, men with guarded eyes, women with worry etched on their faces. The camp stirred and flowed toward them. When they saw her leg, relief and concern collided in a rush of motion. They took her gently, speaking in low, urgent tones, checking the splint, nodding at the work done. The cowboy stepped back, hands open. He said little. There was no need. One of the elders met his eyes, measuring intent against action. After a long moment, the elder inclined his head, a small gesture but a heavy one. Gratitude passed without words. As they carried her toward the shelter, she looked back. Their eyes met once more. She lifted her hand, a brief sign of thanks, and he answered with a quiet nod. The ridge behind them still cast its shadow, but the path ahead had shifted. Pain had been met with mercy, fear with care. He turned his horse toward home as the camp settled around her, knowing that some crossings once made left a mark the desert could not erase.